Welcome in Taberna, where today we're not looking at a dish but a crucial element in many dishes. It's the lid on your pie, the crisp in your croissant, and the base of your favorite little tarts, puff pastry. So today we ask, when did we first start putting butter between sheets of dough to make it extra crispy? And who was the first to do it? Is the pain au chocolat a newfangled hype, or was it served at the Last Supper? Well, to answer all of that, we have to start at the beginning, the origin of puff pastry. But before we do that, we need to look at what puff pastry is. Today, puff pastry is made through the process of laminating butter with dough. Through a process of folding and rolling and then baking, we get effects like this. When baking, the water in the butter boils, pushing the layers apart, creating this rich and versatile baked good. Among home bakers, puff pastry has an infamous reputation of being the thing that separates serious hobbyists from the casual home baker, as making this is considered very hard. Many recipes have complicated instructions requiring measuring tools and calculations, but we don't know of any other baked good that comes with its own equation. So, where did this all start? If you go to the French Wikipedia page for pâte feuilletée, the quick info box proudly declares that this is a French invention. And that seems to make perfect sense, doesn't it? Puff pastry is an unmistakable cornerstone of French cuisine. Without it, no cute little tower in your vol au vent, no delightful tarte à tarte, and no delicate millefeuille. Puff pastry is so French, we are sure that the official rendition of the Marseillaise has a croissant crackling somewhere in the background. So, is it not French? Well, it's complicated. But sir, it was Francois-Pierre de la Varenne who wrote the first proper recipe in his Le Cuisinier François in 1651, wasn't it? Well, he wrote a very good recipe, but it's not the first. Of course, it was actually invented by French painter Claude Gillet while trying to make a light bread for his ill father. That story is heavily debated and most likely not true. Even if it was, it wouldn't have been the first puff pastry. Of course, how silly! The first mention of puff pastry is from Archbishop Robert d'Amiens from 1311. Well, we only have a 19th century reference to this document, and even then, it's still not the first. But that's enough facetiousness. A lot depends on how you define first. But if we want to be thorough, we have to go all the way back to antiquity. In the ancient Greek and Roman worlds, many recipes called for dough to be covered in oil or molten butter. Over time, this dough got the name phyllo dough, from the Greek word for leaf, a dough made up of very finely stacked layers covered in oil or molten butter. Sounds similar to puff pastry, but there are differences. The main one being that phyllo, although a bit oily, is not necessarily very fatty, which is sadly not the case for puff pastry. Today, phyllo is still one of the cornerstones of Balkan and Turkish cuisine, appearing in things like burek, spanakopita, and many other delicious items, both sweet and savory. It's easy to think that the technique spread from Greece and the Balkans throughout the rest of the Roman Empire, and this did indeed happen. A nice example is placenta, which gets its name from the Greek word for cake, but was actually a Roman cheesecake using curds rather than oil or butter to separate the layers of dough. From here, one would think that it spread to the more butter-reliant Western Europe and made its way into our croissants and vol au vent. Only, it didn't. We only see a mention of puff pastry appearing in Western Europe in the High Middle Ages, and actual recipes only popped up in the early modern era. So, after Rome fell, where did it go? Well, looks like it took the long way round. Rather than take the short route via the Western Roman Empire, the technique was adopted in the East, where it was eventually spread by the Byzantine Empire and later by the Umayyad Caliphate. After the fall of both Roman empires, the art of phyllo dough made its way via North Africa to Moorish Spain. So it didn't go from this to this. No, it first became this. The recipe we found is for a sweet treat called musamana and comes to us via an anonymous cookbook from 13th century Moorish Andalucia. And it's very interesting. It first tells us to take wheat flour and knead a stiff dough without yeast. This is easy enough. We're then instructed to add water little by little and not to stop kneading until it relaxes. The test is you should be able to stretch it without severing. Sounds fair enough? Next up, while our pan warms up, we have to roll it out on a piece of marble. Okay, so we're short on marble, so well-seasoned wood will have to do. Now, slather the dough with a melted clarified butter. Hang on, Aren't we making puff pastry? Shouldn't this be solid butter? Yes, clever clogs, we'll get to that. Just do this for now. After slathering the dough with your butter, roll it up. The recipe tells us to aim for the width of a reed. Yes, we don't know either. Just roll it up as tight as possible. Now twist and smack it with your hand until it becomes a round flat disc. If you want, you can now repeat this, but this is, according to the recipe, optional. Now that the dough is ready, we're going to pop this in our pan, which should be nice and hot by now. Grease the pan with, you've guessed it, some butter. Remember what we said about this being greasier than phyllo dough? It gets better. The dough will soak up the butter, so keep adding small amounts of butter until it, according to the recipe, binds. We're then instructed to make as many as we need, and when they're ready, to give them another squeeze between our hands, and then cover them in butter and boiling honey. We said it was interesting, not healthy. Don't worry, it gets worse. Or better, depending on your point of view. When they're cooled, cover them in ground sugar and serve. Now, we appreciate that by now you must have many questions. How is this even puff pastry? It's thick and heavy and not flaky at all. Also, if the butter is melted, isn't it more of a phyllo dough than a puff pastry? Yes, this is indeed somewhere between a phyllo dough and a puff pastry. But the element that brings this a huge step closer to the puff pastry of today is this, the rolling. Rather than layering them like phyllo dough, the dough is rolled and then flattened and potentially rolled again. The first recipe of this type that we could find in Christian Europe is from the Prince Bishopric of Liège. If you ever want to feel like a proper medieval cook, this is the recipe you're looking for, even though it's technically early modern. The recipe, written in 1585, was published in 1615 in the book L'Ouverture de Cuisine by Lancelot de Casteau. It calls for a dough made from fine white flour, water, a little bit of butter and 2 eggs, to be kneaded until it is smooth as paper and a bit soft. After making the dough, the recipe tells us to let it rest, a key step these days. After the rest, it should be rolled out in a long rectangle. We're then instructed to slather this with melted lard. Oh, it's only going to get greasier. It should then be rolled up and the process repeated with a second dough. The two should then be rolled into one big log by enveloping one into the other. It should, according to the recipe, be as big as an arm. We don't know how big an arm though, but we assume Lancelot de Casteau had big arms. And this log is then left to cool. This would traditionally be done in a cellar, but you can use your fridge. Once cooled, it's chopped in chunks 3 fingers wide, which are then compressed and filled with savory meats, before being baked for 20 minutes at high heat, resulting in flaky pasties like this. This all sounds very different from the rolled-up sugar bomb we made before, and we're pretty sure that lard didn't come from the Moors. But there is one very strong clue that there is a connection between these two. The writer, Lancelot de Casteau, calls the recipe faire pastés d'Espagne feuilletée, or to make pasties of Spanish puff pastry. So now we have greased dough which can be savory. We're getting closer, but we're still not using cold butter. Well, the first of those we were able to find comes from England, where we get a recipe from the book Delights for Ladies by botanist and forgotten Blackadder 2 character Sir Hugh Platt. First, we have to make a dough using a quarter of flour, which is roughly 500 grams. Now we'll make this into a dough with 2 whole eggs and an extra egg white. Add some water if needed until it comes together. Next, the recipe instructs us to roll it abroad. We're going to take that means nice and wide. The next step is the one we've all been waiting for. Place solid butter upon the dough, in small bits as big as nuts. He doesn't specify which nuts, so we are just going to make our knobs of butter as big as these. Now we're instructed to fold over the dough and roll it out again. Ooh, are we there? Next, Sir Hugh tells us to repeat the buttering and rolling for a total of 10 times. Using the puff pastry equation, we can calculate that this will give us roughly 1024 layers. Now, that's very impressive, but it might be overkill. We made this dough in testing and it does become puff pastry, but rather mediocre. The constant adding of new butter causes the layers to keep bursting and be very uneven. The thing is, Sir Hugh wasn't a cook, and Delights for Ladies is not just a cookbook. It includes recipes for hair and beard dye, which involve lead and quicklime, and methods for many other funny things like perfumes and cocktails. We think he conflated some techniques that he overheard kitchen staff mentioning. In Gervase Markham's The English Housewife, a slightly later book which is focused on cooking, there is a puff pastry recipe which also keeps adding butter, but it uses layering, like phyllo dough, rather than folding. It wouldn't surprise us if these two techniques got conflated here. To fix all this, we recommend using big nuts as your standard so that most of your butter is used in the first 2 or 3 folds, and then do 2 or 3 more to even out the dough. It's fine if you want to keep going all the way up to 10, but we really don't see the need. It's safe to say that throughout the 17th century, puff pastry became pretty important in English cooking. Robert May's 1660 The Accomplished Cook, for example, contains oodles of recipes calling for puff paste. In our next video, we'll actually put these doughs to good use, so make sure to subscribe for that. Also, if you like what we do, leave us a like or a comment. As you might know, we currently don't make any money from our videos, and we're yet to hit the required amount of watch hours. Thanks to all of you, we've already reached the required subscriber count, but we still have watch hours to go. You are already helping by simply watching this, but leaving a like or a comment will help spread this to even more people. Many thanks. So, to recap, we have an Andalusian recipe and one from Liège. But while Liège is French speaking, it was part of the Spanish Netherlands at the time and Belgium today. The earliest recipe we have that actually resembles modern day puff pastry is English. So, where is France in all of this? Well, it's inevitable, isn't it? We mentioned it at the start of the video. In 1651, Francois-Pierre de La Varenne published Le Cuisinier François. 2 years later, he published Le Pâtissier François, and these books were then combined in subsequent editions. It has to be pointed out that de La Varenne was not simply a French chef, he was the French chef. If you've ever wondered why it is that French seems to be the standard language in all things kitchen related, it's because of him. A lot of the terms that are still common parlance in kitchens today are from his books. And the influence it had on culinary culture, both in France and abroad, cannot be overstated. Have you ever noticed how loads of old recipes use lard instead of butter? It was La Varenne who influenced the switch from lard to butter. The first instructions on a bouquet garni? Indeed, La Varenne. The first millefeuille? You've guessed it. So of course this book also contains a recipe and multiple applications for pâte feuilletée, or puff pastry in English. Well, tough luck, Frenchie. England got there first. Now get that flag off Wikipedia. It's land of hope, glory and puff pastry pies. Ruling the waves and layers of dough. Well, that is a take, but we advise caution. To examine this, let's take a look at La Varenne's recipe before we jump to conclusions. His recipe is not that different from Sir Hugh's. If anything, it's a bit easier to follow. Take a dough consisting of purely flour, water and a bit of salt. Something that's been missing until now. Knead it well and roll it out. It should be soft to the touch. Next, let it rest for half an hour. After the rest, take a block of butter and press it into roughly the size of the sheet of dough. La Varenne instructs us to make the butter sheet the same size as the dough sheet. However, modern recipes will tell you to make the butter sheet slightly smaller than the dough sheet. Place it on your dough and now fold in the corners, completely wrapping up the butter when done. Roll back out to the original size. Let it rest again and repeat. Do this 4 to 5 times. This only gets our score on the pastry equation to 32, a measly number compared to Sir Hugh's 1024. However, note that La Varenne's recipe is significantly longer. It includes steps like keeping the dough floured so it doesn't tear, and rather than using eggs to make the dough stretchy, it uses resting time, allowing for the dough to be pliable without making it too heavy. But what's more important is the book the recipe was in. From here, La Varenne's recipe would be adopted in culinary culture, and not only in France. La Varenne ends his instructions by saying the dough should eventually be rolled as thin as an écu coin, and later in the 18th century we see other recipes use this same standard. We also see subsequent recipes dropping the need to make the dough with eggs. Over the decades and later centuries, more advanced recipes, which emphasize the role of rest and above all cooling, would be developed. A lot of present-day puff pastry recipes will instruct you to cool the dough between every 2 folds at least, but the starting point is still La Varenne's method. If you're wondering how well it stood the test of time, the recipe on BBC Good Food, for example, is almost identical to La Varenne's. Yes, that's all very nice, but where is it from? Clearly the French weren't first. No, they weren't, but that might be a result of England having a more prevalent culture of printing recipe books than it was in France before the mid-1600s, which is another thing La Varenne changed. Point is that it's sort of hard, if not impossible, to stick a flag on a technique, as you will inevitably end up arguing on semantics. Despite versions from other countries predating the French puff pastry, the reason puff pastry is seen as quintessentially French is the food culture that grew around it in France. It's hard to think about French cuisine without puff pastry. It's like removing pasta from Italian cooking or the art of roasting from English food. It just doesn't work. Did France invent puff pastry? Not in the purest sense of the word, no. Did they make it what it is today? Yes. Be it with some help from others. So what's all that stuff about croissants being Austrian then? That's a whole different story for another time. We hope you enjoyed this video on puff pastry. As we said, we saw it necessary to make this video as we want to talk about some foods involving puff pastry in the future. And this video will hopefully serve as a good reference point. If you don't want to miss these videos, please subscribe. In our next video, we'll put La Varenne and Sir Hugh's puff pastries to good use. Also, please feel free to share your favorite method and/or application for puff pastry in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching.